So will he do a great job? How will Mr Trump's visit to the UK play out? He's due to meet the Queen, Theresa May, and visit Scotland, as well as having dinner at Blenheim Palace. But police are planning the biggest mobilisation of officers since 2011, as thousands of people plan to demonstrate against the visit. So with a threat of massive protests, can the event be a success? Joining me now, Greg Swenson, a member of Republicans Overseas, and Beth Gardner, American political journalist. Greg, to you first of all, this isn't a proper official visit, is it?
No, it's not, and I think I think he wisely is avoiding too much time in London, and I know that they had talked about this, after his inauguration, when Theresa May made a visit to Washington right away, which I thought was a very good move on her part, and it was good for the special relationship. So, look, I know it's not an official visit, but I think it's a very wise move to do it. It works well with the NATO gathering in Brussels, as well as followed by the Helsinki meeting with Putin. So, yeah, I think it's good timing.
Good timing, Beth?
Well, I think if you stop for a minute and consider the fact that a British citizen was killed on British soil by what appears to have been Russian nerve agent just within the last few days, and the UK cannot really be certain that America sort of has its back on this one, that tells you what unprecedented territory we're on here. I think Theresa May is going to have her hands full. It's obviously been quite a week for her. And Trump is as unpredictable as they come. So I think she'll be pretty pleased if she can just get through this meeting, sort of unscathed, without any, sort of embarrassing outbursts at the press conference or on Twitter. But that is far from guaranteed. And we've certainly seen, even over the last few hours at this summit over in Brussels, that, Trump is, we've seen, I guess, the disdain with which he regards the relationships and the alliances that have sort of undergirded American security and global stability really over the decades since World War II. There's been some strain between him and Theresa May, notably over those retweets by him of some of the hateful anti-Muslim videos from Britain First. So as I said, I think we're on pretty unprecedented territory. Trump has also shown us that he has very little regard for the sort of reasons why allies don't, muddle in one another's affairs domestically. He sort of launched that bomb into the meeting before he took off from Washington about, Boris Johnson is a good friend of mine. Maybe we'll meet him. Maybe I'll meet him while I'm over there. So, he doesn't have very much regard for sort of the niceties of these kinds of meetings. And certainly that will have Theresa May pretty nervous, I would imagine.
And Greg, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, we look back to the G7, and it is the fact that the President Trump may well say one thing to Theresa May. He may make an agreement. She may think, oh, this is great, it's all sorted. And then he goes away and has to think about it and tears it up.
Yeah, look, Beth, I'd agree with you on one thing, that Trump is very unpredictable. And, he's a disruptive president. He's a disruptive politician. But I think that, I think the press and the left take a lot of his things too seriously. And look, it's a serious business. It's a serious topic. As a conservative, I wish he was a little more careful with his language and a little more careful with his diplomacy or his lack of diplomacy. But the disruption has been working in many cases, and I think it's an opportunity for the UK and the US to get together, and I'm very optimistic.
And Beth, sorry, I know your EP's just had a couple of issues there. Being disruptive, as Greg was saying, it can be good. It can be useful being disruptive as a politician, can't it? Shaking things up.
Sure. I guess it depends on the content of what exactly you're disrupting. And I think that we've seen from Trump's behavior, which is, often appears to be sort of quite impulsive and shooting from the hip, that, he's not guided by a lot of the precepts that have sort of, maintained our alliances and our relationships over the past years. So we've seen allies sort of having to resort to this kind of flattery and ego stroking and trying to kind of keep him in check and hoping to, avoid the kinds of blow-ups that we saw at the G7 a month or two ago in Quebec, where he really tried to sort of blow up the meeting, refused to, sign on to the agreement. And obviously with NATO the summit going on in Brussels right now, you're seeing that as well. And, this, sure, disruption can be useful, but, there doesn't seem to be very much sort of care or strategy behind this. And, you're seeing a lot of anxiety in countries, for example, in the Baltics, places like Latvia, that are nervous as Putin sort of eyes them a bit hungrily, and wondering whether America and NATO are there for them. So, whether this sort of disruption is productive, well, I think there's a lot of questions about that, and that's why, so many of the U.S. allies are so very anxious right now.
And in terms of disruption, Greg, there could well be big demonstrations. We know that Trump can very easily be kept away from those. But that, there's this balloon as well, this large inflatable baby that looks like President Trump, or what they think looks like President Trump. Do you think that sort of thing will really bother him, or do you think he just rises above it?
Well, he's not one that usually rises above those things. So I'd have to say that he might let it bother him. I think rather he will just make some comment and he'll try to brush it off or make some joke about it. And look, the protesters are they're demonstrating, but they're using their right to free speech, their right to demonstrate. I think that's fantastic. I think it's great that they're doing that, and it's the very right that that the military supports and that the U.S. government supports. So, look, I don't think that there's an issue with that. I think his disruption, while distasteful sometimes, can work. He's bringing up some really important points in NATO. One is that the Germans are sending a lot of cash, a lot of money to the Russians in Nord Stream 2 and the oil and gas deals, especially natural gas. I think that's very unpleasant. Obama and especially Joe Biden brought the same things up during the Obama administration. And then you have this challenge with all the countries in NATO not spending 2% of their GDP on military. There are 2 or 3 countries that did. The UK is one of them. So good for the UK, good for the special relationship. The trend is getting better. I think you'll see 5 or 6 countries be above 2% this year. But look, he's bringing those topics up. Obama and Biden also had issues with the 2% problem. They had issues with the Nord Stream 2. Joe Biden called it a bad deal. The difference is they didn't really make a big production about it. They didn't really get very much attention. If anything Trump is good at, it's getting attention. And so I think he's drawing attention to some issues that a lot of people would agree with both on the left and the right.
OK, there we must leave it. Greg Swenson and Beth Gardner, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.